All right, so back to 2020, COVID hit. I was staying with my grandpa in Washington for 2 weeks, but then my grandpa ended up kicking me out. But as I said, when I was with my grandpa, I was confused because my grandpa's teaching me about dualistic software and transcending the ego and the flow. And so I asked my grandpa, but what about like the white race? Do you think that that there is an agenda to destroy the white race? And my grandpa was like, it doesn't matter. All that matters is the flow. And I didn't understand that. So I'm thinking like, okay, so I shouldn't worry about the white race. But that's not what he's saying. Because I was like, well, is white supremacy the flow? And my grandpa's like, no, because in the flow, you transcend the self. And if you're in white supremacy, then you still believe that you are a separate self. But at the same time, though, in the flow, now I know there's no formula. And if you're in the flow, you can decide to stop immigration. If you're in the flow, you can make discernments about what is most appropriate. But I thought when he's talking about the flow, I'm thinking it's like some sort of hippie thing, like, oh, let's all race mix hippies. The flow, transcend the ego, okay. Well, race mix, that's what I thought it was. So I'm confused. I'm like, okay, I'm trying to understand. But I'm studying with my grandpa a little bit. But then, as I said, I got confused. And then my grandpa and I got in an argument because my grandpa was basically trying to tell me, but he didn't say it. He didn't say I was a narcissist, but he was saying that you don't have a job and you expect me to take care of you. And I was like, Grandpa, I discovered the theory of everything. And my grandpa's like, you expect special treatment. And I knew what he was trying to say. He's trying to say you're a narcissist. Because narcissists, they say that they're entitled and they expect special treatment. And I told my grandpa, no, I don't expect special treatment. I expect treatment that's congruent with me discovering the theory of everything, which I have done. But my grandpa was saying, no, there's no evidence that you discovered the theory of everything. And my grandpa was right, though, that I was confused at the time. I didn't understand the flow, but that was in big part, it was big part his fault because he would teach me, but he didn't teach me enough. And for years, he wouldn't teach me at all. And I'm going to get to this. So he's basically trying to say, you're entitled and you expect me to take care of you, but I'm not going to take care of you. So if you're going to be staying with me, you need to get a job, because he's talking about the anti-entropic eroding function in life is it's part of the synergy of the universe. And he stopped using the word anti-entropic. He started just using life as a synergistic aspect, and it's part of the evolution toward the omega point type of thing, right? He uses a scientific, kind of new age, but scientific ways of viewing the Bible. That God is energy and we're evolving toward the omega point to the next stage of evolution. And I think my grandpa even thought that AI or just like that robots and stuff would be an aspect of that. I don't know. But so I'm talking to my grandpa and I'm basically like, Grandpa, I did discover theory of everything. He's like, there's no evidence for that. And I'm like, there's a lot of evidence. Look at my Facebook. But my grandpa was like, I'm not interested. He said, this is what my grandpa said. He said, if you discover a theory of everything, people would be talking about it on the news right now. It would be famous. And I'm like, Grandpa, there's been a lot of cases where people discover something huge and it takes a while for it to catch on. And I know in my case, it's because of also I screwed up and, I was a communist for a long time and I didn't understand things because I misinterpreted his teachings. And I'm not saying it's his fault, but he confused me, So anyways, my grandpa basically is trying to say I'm a narcissist, but he didn't use the word narcissist, but he was saying, you're entitled. You expect you expect people to take care of you. I'm like, I'm not entitled. He said, you expect special treatment. I'm not entitled. I don't expect special treatment. I discovered the theory of everything. I hope that people will treat me in a way that's in accordance with me discovering the theory of everything. It's a big deal. And I shouldn't be treated disrespectfully like I've been being treated. So, but anyway, so then my grandpa, he's talking about the synergy, and then we got in an argument, and he kicked me out. He kicked me out of his house in Washington. I had to go back to Los Angeles. And this was right when COVID hit. But then I was writing my Based on True Story book, and in my Based on True Story book, because I was trying to get my grandpa to start teaching me again, I was trying to show him, look, I transcended dualistic software, because my grandpa wasn't a fan of Donald Trump. So I was like, oh, so my grandpa's not for white supremacy. So my grandpa's for race mixing, but I didn't realize that my grandpa's he's not a Nazi, he's not a communist. He's for democracy, and in democracy and in the flow, there is no formula. Sometimes it's good for immigrants to come in, sometimes it's not. But I thought that that if I wasn't a Nazi, then my grandpa's a communist. I thought, oh, maybe he's a communist, and maybe he's for race mixing, So I was like, so I went the other opposite direction. And like I said, but in my Based on True Story book, I'm trying to show my grandpa, look, I transcended the ego, but I didn't realize that I still was in the ego, because I went back to my default, seeing myself as Jewish and being against the white people. And then so like I said, one of the things I wrote in my Based on True Story book was the story of Cain and Abel. And my grandpa taught me that the story of Cain and Abel represented the agricultural revolution, where Cain represents the agriculturalists and Abel the nomads, the nomadic sheep herders. And when I was a communist, I wanted to see the Jews as like the sheep herders, right? And they're the ones who were killed. But in my mind, they're the good guys. But like I said, in the Bible, the people with faith are always killed. And the Bible says that Cain had faith. He believed. But like I said, I tried to invert everything and make the good guys bad and the bad guys good, and say, well, yeah, because faith and belief is not the flow. Because knowing, if you're just stuck in faith, then you don't actually know. If you're just stuck in belief, you don't actually know. And that's why the Jews who don't believe are always saved. And because they never believe, which is a good thing. I wanted to invert everything and be like, yeah, but the Gentiles who believe, like the Romans, the Indo-Europeans, they believe, but then they're destroyed. Because Christianity was a trick to destroy the Roman Empire and save the Jews. It's all just so belief is. I try to invert everything, make belief bad, and say ironically that's the reason why the Jews are the chosen people, because they don't believe. Because belief is not the flow and knowing. So that's the way I looked at the Bible, and I'll get to that later. But basically, my grandpa taught me that the story of Cain and Abel was about the agricultural revolution. But my grandpa would say that, Abel says, or Cain, after he kills Abel, says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And God doesn't respond, but he gives Abel a mark on his forehead, which people say is a cross, the quadrant, right? But God puts a mark on his forehead and actually protects Cain. So my grandpa says, when Cain says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" the common answer, everybody goes, of course, we should all be our brother's keepers. But that's the Marxist communist way of looking at things. But my grandpa says, no, you are not your brother's keeper. That's a condescending, patronizing way of looking at your brother. To say, I'm his keeper. My grandpa says, nobody's their brother's keeper. If you're in the flow, my grandpa would say, you're not your brother's keeper. That's communism. That's patronizing. That's condescending. My grandpa says, you're not your brother's keeper. You're your brother's brother. And if you're in the flow, you don't necessarily take care of somebody who's acting parasitical. Now, but of course, I hated this because I felt like, now my grandpa's correct. I think, he's accurate that that there's no formula for the flow. But I hated it because, remember, my grandpa was the one who was like, make Ryan independent. And I felt like I needed my mom and dad's help. And my grandpa even admits, my mom and dad misinterpreted this. So my mom and dad are like, okay, make Ryan independent? And that will help him to transcend the ego? Okay, well then we'll completely cut him out of our lives. We'll never talk to him. And they never talked to me. And my grandpa even says that he cast pearls of swine, and because he says that they don't have, my grandpa thinks my mom is stuck in predator-prey software, because my mom was like, he's schizophrenic, he's a loser. My grandpa's like, yes, your mom that's predator-prey software. She's in a very low level of software, and she's not in the flow. And same thing with my grandpa. My grandpa says that, my grandpa says my dad's very stubborn and he's not in the flow. But regardless, my mom and dad misinterpreted my grandpa's teachings, and my grandpa admits that. But then I tell my grandpa, why don't you tell them to stop isolating me and to see me and to treat me with some dignity? And my grandpa's like, because I don't give answers unless questions are given. But I'm like, well, you gave the answer that they misinterpreted. You cast pearls of swine. He's like, yes, I made a mistake when I did that. But anyways, I felt like because my grandpa didn't believe the quadrant model, and I always felt like my grandpa messed up in that aspect. But regardless, my parents really messed up, and I felt like the reason why my grandpa got angry at me when I was in Washington, and he said, I'm not going to teach you anymore, and then he kicked me out of his house. But when I would tell my grandpa, because I was telling my grandpa, can you please get dad to talk to me? And my grandpa's like, the reason he doesn't talk to you is because of your software. It's because of your software. So I always felt like he's a victim blamer. He says, it's not you, it's your software, because you are not your software. You could always upgrade your software. But so I felt like my grandpa was not talking to me and trying to justify my dad not talking to me by doing the same thing. and being like, I'm not talking to you. It's not because of you. It's because of your software. And I don't want to associate with your software, because I would get angry at my grandpa, and it's a tragic situation. And he didn't understand about the shoot away machine. He thought there was something wrong with me, that it was because of my software that problems happened, but it really was a shoot away machine. And it's a tragic situation. So I'm trying to talk to, but I felt like what I needed was not independence. I needed some help. I wanted some support. I needed some love, some care, and some compassion for my family, my mom and my dad. And I felt like, and I would call my mom at that time, because my grandpa stopped teaching me. I'm like, Mom, Grandpa's not teaching you. Well, he doesn't have to. You can't make things happen, Ryan. You can't make, because remember, she's stuck in the past about the shooting machine. When my shot got messed up, it was a shooting machine, and I'm trying to get my dad to help. And then my grandpa goes in, Ryan, you can't make things happen. Everything's the flow. Everything's one. It's a tragic situation. So I'm like, Mom, can you please tell Grandpa to start studying with me again? Because I want to learn. I want to know. But my mom's like, you can't make things happen, Ryan. You can't make things happen. He doesn't want to talk to you. Then he doesn't want to talk to you. Just like your dad doesn't want to talk to you. He doesn't want anything to do with you, so you can't force things. You can't force things. And then she hang up. So now I'm isolated from everybody, and I want to learn more from my grandpa. And I remember when I was in when I was in Washington, I was talking to my grandpa, and I told him, listen, Grandpa, because I had studied the Enneagram, and I had studied the Myers-Briggs, and I'm an INTP Enneagram 5W4. And the Enneagram 5W4 is called the philosopher. He's the knower. He's the philosopher. And they say what the philosopher really wants more than anything is knowledge. He wants to know. And everything else is not important. He wants to know. And that is true with me. I don't care about anything. I just want to know. I want to study as much as possible, and I want to know. And they say that they really want competence, but they really just want to know. They're philosophers. That's what I am, a 5W4. So I was like, so I was like, so Grandpa, please don't not study with me, Grandpa, because I need your help and I want to know, I want to learn. And at the time, he should have studied me because I was confused. I didn't understand what he's talking about with the flow. It took me years, I was in confusion. So, but my grandpa's like, that's not true. You don't just want to know. Because my grandpa always wanted to make me the fucking bad guy, dude. So my grandpa's like, it's not that you just want to know. And this is the thing. In my based on true story books before, I would write them to try to get my grandpa to teach me again. But in those based on true story books, remember, my grandpa's big thing was take responsibility. But my grandpa would say, you don't take responsibility because you don't exist. You take responsibility for your software, which you can always upgrade. So, but in those books, I didn't understand that. I thought he was talking about like just take responsibility. So I'd make myself out to be the bad guy in my based on true story books. So I was like, really, what in those books that I wrote before, I would be like, really, I just wanted to get power, because I didn't understand. I didn't know my subconscious. And like I said, at that time, I didn't realize, I hadn't really deciphered that, when I was anti-religion, it was because I wanted to destroy the white race, which is true. But I didn't want to admit that in those books. So I never admitted that in those books. And I just said, I always believed in Darwinism, but that made me into a white supremacist. That's not true. When I believed in Darwinism, I was anti-white, and I wanted to destroy Christianity, destroy the white people, and destroy spirituality. And when I became more religious, I became more pro-white, when I became more pro-spiritual. But anyways, I never deciphered that in those books. I had that realization later, but I always knew that, but I never wanted to admit it, because I never wanted to admit that I was anti-white, wanted race mixing, because I thought that would be bad for the Jewish people. And really, I wanted to save the Jewish people. I wanted to help the Jewish people, but I didn't realize that, ironically, I wasn't helping the Jewish people, but that's what I wanted to do by race mixing the white people. So when my grandpa's like, you don't want to just want knowledge, because that would be a good thing to just know, that want information. My grandpa was like, in those books, remember in those books, you said that what you wanted was power. And it's true in those books, because I was trying to make myself out to be the bad guy. I was like, and I believed in Darwinism, and maybe there was an aspect that I wanted to be superior, and I wanted to have a lot of children and stuff because I wanted to be superior. And I tried to like blame myself, but my grandpa said, it's not you, it's your software. But again, that was my Marxist. I wasn't in the flow, and I didn't see reality the way it was, and I wanted to believe that Marxism was true, because and genetic Darwinism was true, and the black man, because I really wanted to race mix the black and white people, and because I had that dualistic software, and I was stuck in my ego seeing myself as Jewish, and I wanted to see like that the black people were the original men who came out of Africa, and everyone else is inbred, and I like that idea, and I like the materialist idea, even though that is an opinion, even though people say that that's scientific, we don't really know. But I had an agenda, and my ego colored the way that I saw things, no pun intended. So basically, when I was talking to my grandpa, I was like, Grandpa, really, I just want knowledge. My grandpa's like, no, remember in your Based on True Story books, you said you wanted power. And it's true. I said I did want power. I did. And that's what, when I was on Kauai and I was writing when I was writing the stuff, my communist stuff, and I was trying to say the Bible is communist, I did want to get power because I really did want to get my basketball videos. But, my grandpa's like, well, why do you want to get the basketball videos? Because you want power, and because you want to mate, and so it's superior, inferior software. And I'm like, but really, no, really, why I wanted the basketball videos is to study the flow. But my grandpa's like, well, to study the swag flow. My grandpa's like, why do you want to study the swag flow? It's in my Based on True Story books, I tried to blame myself and be like, well, maybe because I want to have mates and because I want to be superior. But really, when it boils down to it, the fact of the matter was, I wanted to know. That was the basic it. I wanted to study swag flow because I want to see and I want to know. And I want to study that. I want to study what I did. I want to see the truth. That really is the foundation of what I want. But my grandpa didn't want to believe that was the case with me. My grandpa wanted to believe that I had an ulterior agenda that was egocentric and that I was not pure in my intentions, which I think that I was. Deep down, and I think even my grandpa would even admit that. He says that deep down in everybody, he said, love is when you look at a baby with its diaper full of shit, but you can see past the shit and you see the baby. And deep down, my intentions are pure. When I wanted to get power, I wanted to get my basketball videos. But my grandpa's like, oh, because you wanted power and that's the ego. And egos. No, I wanted the basketball videos to study the swag flow. Oh, because you want my grandpa made me the bad guy. Because you want the ego. No, because I want to study the swag flow to see the truth. To see the most purest thing. And even my grandpa, when I studied with him the story of Narcissus in the Greek mythology, apparently Narcissus, when he looks into the water, he sees something like the flow, and that's why he continues to look. So there was something pure in that, and then he's turned into a flower, which shows that there was something pure. And it wasn't really narcissism. He wanted the flow. Like, I want the flow. I want to study the swag flow. I want to study and I want to know. I want to see the truth. And I'm gonna get to some deep stuff. I'm gonna go into some deep stuff later. But again, and I kind of didn't like my grandpa. Part of the reason I didn't like my grandpa was because, like I said, he wanted to make me get a job. But I'm like, Grandpa, I can't get a job. I discovered theory of everything. I need to study. But really deep down, why do I want to study so much? And I heard that Karl Marx was even the same way, kind of like he just wanted to study. He wanted to be a scholar. But I'm like, I'm an INTP 5W4. That is I am made this way. I don't want to work because I have so much that I need to study because I want to know the truth. I want to know the essence of things. And that's why it tore me apart so much that my grandpa kept on stopping studying with me. And my grandpa's like, well, I want you to be independent. My mom's like, oh yeah, make him independent, kick him out of our lives. If they would have just supported me and nurtured me, like I said, I could have gotten to basketball, done huge stuff with basketball, studied the swag flow, done a lot of huge stuff. If I had some support, but they isolated me, but if I had their support, I could have done huge stuff and I would have been studying. And that's why I hated my grandpa's whole thing, like, well, you got to work, even though my grandpa says work isn't necessarily important, but creative projects is, and being in creativity and synergy, because my grandpa would even admit that work isn't necessarily the flow, but the evolution and working and getting outside of yourself. My grandpa says commitments are important because it takes you outside of yourself and outside of your whims and everything. But regardless, I wanted to know and I wanted to study and I wanted to get the truth. And then my grandpa stops teaching me. He's like, oh, you just wanted power. No, I wanted I admitted I wanted the power so I can so I can study. I want the power so that I can study. Listen to me, believe me. I'm a 5W4. I want to know. That's my most core essence. But my grandpa didn't want to believe that. He wanted to make me out to be the bad guy. So I wanted to study. I wanted to study swag flow. I wanted to see the truth. I want to know. But my grandpa, he kicked me aside. And that hurt me the most because my grandpa's like, I'm not going to teach you anymore. But I needed to study with him more because I was confused. So now I'm writing my Based on True Story book trying to get him to teach me again. And in the book, like I said, I talked about Cain and Abel and how it represented the agricultural revolution and everything. But I was against my grandpa's idea of, don't be your brother's keeper, be your brother's brother. And I was saying, no, we should give to the poor. We should help. Because I was looking at myself as like Abel, who was being thrown to the side and killed. And I needed help. you know? So I'll get to this more.